Okay, it is September 17th, 2022, and I've been making some changes to K2, lots of changes always going on, and trying to get a little bit of documentation out there and fixing things as I'm finding them. So it's time to go back through the install steps and show you what we've done. Hopefully made it a little easier to install. So here it is, gitlab.com/post.ethan/K2. So you can go ahead and clone this repository, and you're going to end up with something like this. I've got a lot of other folders showing here, so let's just focus on this K2 folder because that is the repo. And what we're going to do first is you can install it just using the default program. So if you go to the install folder and look at default install, we could create our user. That's the K2 user script here. Add the grants, which you're going to see these in a second. And then we could run default install, which is basically going to install K2 by running that script, which is right here. And then it's going to install the app, which doesn't really have any code in it. It's more of a template. So what we really want to do is set up a new development environment. And I've got a shell script for that now called new app. And it basically just copies and renames some things. It does do a find and replace on one file with sed here to replace the default path with your app name path. It is going to take lowercase app name. It's going to take the app name as the first parameter. So all it's going to do is copy this default folder in the app. We need to do config. We need to copy default and config in install and then in test. So it's just going to copy these folders and then do some renames and stuff. So let's go ahead and run that. And I'm going to call this app quicksand. Obviously, I've already done this once, but we're going to do it again. And hopefully it'll all work. And so if you do that, you can call it whatever it is. There is now your app folder, and this is where your application code goes. In our config, we now have one quicksand, and we can come in here, and we would want to run through these and configure them. So I might first go ahead and start the version off with 2022-09-17. I might put a real email address in here and go through these things. If you've got Oracle, if you're on Oracle Cloud, you might need to get these values and run them. That's something you need to do manually, but it's here for reference. Our K2 config, we might want to set the environment. We might want to set the app name to quicksand, and we'll leave the dev there. Once we get this in Apex, I'm not going to show that part, but we would maybe put the app ID here, your app domains, whatever servers you're using to host those. Ords URL prefix is usually ords, but it is Apex on Max Apex. Time zone, it's just a value. It's not actually being used at this point for much. It probably will in the future. It's being used in my Superloser app, but it's not really part of much in the K2 application. Apex debug prefix, you could change that to, you could leave it as K2, or, we could call it quicksand and quicksand dev. And this will, in Arc SQL log, it will just, if we're using K2 like debug, it will add that to the entries so they're a little easier to find. This is all stuff I'm going to go over later. So we're going to leave all that there. And secret SAS auth, we would want to definitely change our salt string here. And we want to change the authorization test password for any test users we create. And we also may want to change the authorization pass prefix, which basically prevents anybody from creating an account unless they know the secret prefix and put it on their password when they create the account. That is just a way to keep have your site public facing, but make it a little harder for people to actually create accounts. So basically go through all this stuff and try to figure out what those settings need to be. So once we have the config set up, if we go to quicksand dev, you can see it's written an install script, and this is where it's doing like a find and replace. It's finding default and changing it to quicksand, And then it also did that up here in the app install, which it changed to quicksand install. So like it changes that path right there. That would normally be default for all the default config, and it changes it to quicksand. And under test, there isn't going to be any tests because there's none in default at this point. And so that's it. That's what we have. So what we need to do now, and you can see basically what I did, I ran the script and I modified the config files. So once we're done with that, what we're going to do is go over to SQL Developer, and I'm kind of already set up here. I'm going to run create user and create my app user if it doesn't already exist. So run that as admin. And that went fine. So now we're going to go to K2 grants. And these are all scripts in the root folder. And again, add qsdev, that's our user, and we're going to run the grants. So let's just run that as a script. If there are any, like if your application has grants, you could modify this to always do that. So you could say, you know, .app quick, where are we at? Actually, this won't work because you have to point to dev or prod, and this does not have a dev or prod. But you do need to run any app grants you have for your particular application. Okay, so we're not going to say that right now. We're just going to leave that there. So I've got the user created, added the permissions. We go to open, and we'll go to K2, install. And this is how all your apps are maintained and installed. So anytime you make changes, you want to refresh it, it's the same exact thing we're going to do here. I'm going to run this one step at a time, but you could run the whole script. And first we're going to install K2. And we're going to run that. I've already got a connection set up for this against that qsdev account. And here we go. Oh, yeah, always does that. Okay, so there it's running. You want to make sure there's no errors. There shouldn't be, but if there are, let me know what they are, or try to troubleshoot them and let me know what your the problem was and what the solution was, and maybe that will need to be wrapped into the install procedure. So that's installing K2. Now, you always got to remember, when you install K2, it always puts the default config files back. It's not until you run your install that you get your config. And we need those config files for stuff to compile that's part of K2. And we don't know about your files necessarily, or we might have new values and things like that. So this has to run first, and then we run that. And we got a bug. Oh, yep, I know exactly what that is. That needs some quotes. Okay. Okay, well, ignore this because this will be fixed, and I know exactly. I just don't have the single quotes around. I just changed this to get rid of the something else, and we'll fix that. Arc SQL contact groups, and then obviously run commit. There's a procedure to fix identity sequences if you've done some importing into or moved data between environments, and you need to your sequences are out of date with the data in the table. That can run. So that's it. So that's it. You're all installed, up and running, and you're ready to begin development. I'm not going to get into what that looks like. I will be talking about probably showing you Superloser because that's a pretty fully featured app. But this is just to show you, get an update on how to do the install, and so that when you look at the README here, it'll make sense when you watch this video. All right, thanks.